Okay, so this is my first time working on Gorwaa, and I find the language very interesting. So I've always worked on the West African languages, the Mabia languages, the Kwa, basically group of languages, but now looking at Afro-Asiatic or Cushitic in this case now. So it's very interesting. And so I'm going to talk about WH questions and focus in Gorwaa, and this is a very interesting topic to me as a whole. And that's why I wanted to see how does it work, right, in Gorwaa. So how do we form WH questions as well as the focused answers in Gorwaa? So let me give you a very quick introduction. So cross-linguistically, languages actually employ different strategies for WH questions formation and as well as focus construction itself. And some of these strategies include WH or focus fronting, cleft or pseudo cleft use, the use of morphology, and this is very prevalent in West African languages. So a lot of focus markers going around and even question particles, so a lot of morphology, and also the use of prosody. That's another way, another strategies that languages use in marking WH questions or even focus. And for the prosody, it's more of the European or Indo-European languages like English or German that uses prosody, right? So for example, in English, WH questions are usually formed by fronting the WH phrases or the WH phrase to a sentence initial position. If you look at 1A, so in 1A, if you say, what did Adam buy? So you have the WH object fronted, or in 1B, you have a subject WH, so who bought a car? And there is always a debate whether this is fronted or not. And usually people assume that it's actually fronted. And one way people have used to argue for the claim of this fronting is with 1C, where you can actually have an adjunct in between the final landing site of the WH subject and the canonical subject position. So basically, if you compare 1B and 1C, 1B looks like more like string backwards, so it might not have moved or it might not have been fronted. But with 1C, then it becomes obvious that if you have something in between, then the WH subject has been fronted to a higher position. Not just WH phrases, but also focus answers. So usually we know that if you want to elicit for focus, one of the common way of doing that is with respect to question answer congruence, right? So when you ask a question and the person answers, and usually the answer to that question is seen as a focus, right? So, and in English, with focus, you use prosody. So that's why in 2A, as an answer to the question, what did Adam buy? So you say Adam bought a car. So that's a typo, but Adam bought a car. And in 2B, the question is who bought a car, right? And then you answer Adam bought a car. So you see prosody used in marking focus, right? It can also be fronted, but that's not, since English is not a topic, I just wanted to show that, there's a lot out there. And among the African languages, WH questions as well as their corresponding focus answers have been extensively investigated, of course, by many scholars. And I'm presenting this example from Yoruba, which is my mother tongue. So if you look at Yoruba, you see that both the focus, the WH question as well as focus answer has like a morphology. So if you look at 3Q, so you have Kini Adera, so you have a focus morphology or focus particle, that, as people have called it, focus marker, following the fronted WH phrase. And in 3A1, that is the first answer, you can answer by saying Ishune Adera. Again, you have this ne focus particle that always follows the fronted focus. And in 3A2, that is the second, another way of answering that same question is you can just have it in situ, so without fronting. So Adera Ishune. Now, the ne here, you notice that I put the asterisk in the bracket, which means that you cannot have the knee in this case. But in 3A1, you need the knee, and that's why it's outside the bracket. It's obligatory, right? So what this shows in 3A2 is that the knee cannot be available, or is not available with in situ focus, right? So the question will be how? How then would you know if issue is in focus? And the simple answer to this is just the pragmatic. So the question that is asked is, what did Ade buy? And definitely we are expecting an object, right? So that's one way to know if, the focus is an in situ, and what exactly is the focus in that kind of sentence, right? So, okay. So, of course, in other languages as well, like Chichewa, Tuki, and many African languages, the WH and focus construction actually have been shown to have hallmarks of cleft and pseudo-cleft structures. So I didn't give an example here because it's going to be a lot, right? But I included this because we are going to see that in Gorwaa, the cleft pattern is actually what we find. The pseudo cleft pattern is what we find. And so in this talk, what I'm going to show you in a bit is I'm going to present novel data on WH questions and focus constructions in Gorwaa. And I'm going to highlight the properties of these transformations. And I will propose a very sketchy analysis. It's very sketchy because when we do the field work, or let's say the elicitation session with the speaker and with discussion with Andrew, we found out that there is a lot going on actually, right? So what I'm going to present as analysis is just a sketch. So it's not something big because there is a lot going on, and I'm going to also mention that during the outlook or the conclusion. And of course, we can discuss other matters at the end, right? Okay, so this is the outline. I will give you data on questions and focus in Gorwaa. So like a pair, you're going to be like a pair. And then the proposed sketch or the proposer, and then conclude with outlook. So let's start with the first outline. Subject WH questions and answer in Gorwaa. So in Gorwaa, what we found is that WH subject actually appears to have an inverse specificational copula. Now, I am going to, if anyone is not familiar with inverse specificational copula, I will talk about that towards the analysis, and I will also use this data to explain what it means. So if you look at 4Q, that is the 4 question, right? The question in 4, who ate beans? So that is the question we asked our speaker, and it gave a structure like this. So where you have Ama, E, Lusinga, Hai. And what this shows is that you notice that unlike what I showed for Yoruba, for example, where you have like this focus morphology in WH, there's nothing like that here. What you have here is more like a syntactic kind of focus marking, or let's say WH marking, where you have a copula followed by the WH phrase, and then you have person. So literally what the sentence means is that who is the person that ate beans, something like that. So who is the person that ate beans, right? So you have like a copula, the bridge phrase, and then like a relative clause, basically. And that's why I call it inverse specificational copula. And I'm going to go into that more in a bit. And if you want to answer that question, you can answer it in 2 ways. So either you answer it with a pseudo cleft, because if you look at A1, so for A1, so the literal translation would be the person who ate beans is Adam, right? So the way you have it in English, so the person who ate beans is Adam, right? So again, the fact that you have the copula preceding Adam in this case, it shows that you have a pseudo cleft where the focus is at the end of the sentence and is preceded by the copula, and then you have like a relative clause in the initial position. So you have like relative clause, copula, focus constituent. And in A2, this is another way that you can answer that question. So this is just like a canonical or non-cleft structure. So in A2, and we've already seen with most of the talks, right? We know that Gorwaa is OV language. And so in A2, you see just the canonical sentence pattern. So Adam, Losingi, I. So you have the subject, the object, and then the verb, right? So there is no cleft here, at least on the surface. There's no cleft, so it looks like a canonical pattern or word order of the language. So the summary of the subject WH question is that with the question, we seem to have what looks like a specification, a copula. With the answers, we have something that looks like cleft, actually. That's one option. And the second option is like a non-cleft or in a canonical way of having a declarative in the sentence that can also be used to answer the question. The example I just showed now is, this is for perfective. Now we also try for imperfective aspect with respect to subject WH, and we found similar thing. And why this is interesting is because in some languages, it has been shown that with respect to aspect, you can actually have different structure, especially, as far as I know, you see that more with negation. So I wanted to see whether you can see something like that in with focus. And or with WH question. And what we notice is that it's not really different. So both perfective aspect and imperfective, you seem to have similar structure with respect to WH question as well as focused answer. So let me walk you through quickly. So in 5Q, this is the imperfective WH question. Again, you have what looks like a specificational, but in this case, of course, we see that the copula is in the first position. So the copula and then the who, and then person, beans, so this is like the literal translation will be who is the person eating beans, something like that, right? And you can answer this question in 3 ways. So you can answer either with the pseudo cleft as in A1. So this is the pseudo cleft where you have the relative clause and then the copula, and then you have the focused answer, Adamu, right? So this literally means the person eating beans is Adam, right? And you can also answer the same question with a normal declarative or like a canonical word order where you have the subject, the verb, and then the object, just like we saw for the perfective aspect case, right? And thirdly, now we see that in A3, you can also answer this question by using like this specificational copula. Now, if you compare A1 and A2, the difference is that in A1, you have a pseudo clef because the focus is now at the end of the or follows the copula, while in A3, we have the focus constituent or focus word although it follows the copula here, but it actually precedes the relative clause, right? So the relative clause is like at the end of the clause while you have a copula and then the focused marker. I'm going to show a structure later on, but basically what I assume is going on here, just to give you like a teaser, is that the copula actually it follows, so canonically it follows the focus, but then there is like an head movement that goes on. So because what you would have in English is, Adam is the person eating rice, right? Where is follows Adam. But in A3, what you have is like an head movement where the copula, moves to a higher head, and then you have what we see in A3 in Gorwaa, right? Okay, let's look at object WH question and answers. So for the object WH and object focus, answer, it also employs pseudo-clef constructions, as in what we've seen already in with respect to subject, WH, and focus. And particularly the WH question actually looks like pseudo-clef. So if you look at the 6Q1, what did Adam eat? That is the question that was asked, right? So what did Adam eat? Now we see again the Mila, which is the object WH phrase, follows the copula. So you have a relative clause, the copula, and then the WH object phrase. So what it literally means is like saying the thing Adam ate is what, right? So the thing Adam ate is what. And secondly, you can also ask an object WH questions with what you find in Q2. And what is interesting in Q2 is that in Q2, you still have a pseudo cleft, but it seems that you have like a topicalization of the subject inclusive, right? So if you compare Q1 and Q2, you notice that in Q1, Adam follows the thing, right? But in Q2, what you find is now Adam preceding the thing. So it's like Adam preceding the relative clause, kind of like Adam leaving the relative clause and going to a higher topic position or something. So it's interesting to actually have this option, because what I was expecting is that Q1, just Q1, right? That's what we've seen with subject. But now with object WH, you can actually have like not just WH question, but also topicalization of the subject, right? Okay. Now, as an answer to that question, we can answer in 2 ways. So either 7A1, so gar, tar, I, aloc. So he had beans, and this basically looks, this is just a pseudo cleft construction. So the thing he ate is beans. Or you can answer with, an in situ focus, or let's say in situ construction or canonical construction, as in A2. So again, Gorwaa is SOV, so you have Adam, subject, loci, object, and then the verb. So in this case, there is no cleft here. It's just like, a canonical declarative sentence where loci is the object. I mean, the question, of course, that this raises is that what then marks the focus here, right? So how do we know that loci is the focus in this case? I mean, if you compare A1 and A2, A1 is clear because you have like a pseudo clef that's like a restructuring or a structural change or transformation. But in A2, the fact that you have SOV in the language and then also in this answer SOV, the question would be, how then do we know what is in focus? But I mean, the simple answer would just be the question under discussion gives us an idea of what should be in focus. So if you ask a question, what did Adam eat? Of course, you wouldn't answer by saying it was Adam who ate beans, because Adam is already given, right? So it was beans Adam ate. So basically, all right. Okay. And lastly, for the data, I also checked for adjunct WH questions and answers, right? And for adjunct WH questions, what we found again is, the same pseudo-cleft construction, right, for WH questions. So as in 8Q, so Adamu, Losinga, I, Dakala. So again, a copula, and then you have relative clause, copula, and then you have the adverb when, right? And for answer, interestingly, at least so far, I mean, there could be more to say to this, but so far what we found is that for the answer, you have just like the canonical way. So where you have the subject, the object, the verb, and then the adverb. So usually the adverb is in the clause final position. So in this case, there is nothing that looks like pseudo cleft here. It just looks like a normal, canonical SOV adverb construction, right? So the question, of course, would be perhaps there is also a pseudo cleft or a kind of specificational alternative, or maybe you can even front this ISA. I can't really remember, but it seems I think one of the I can't remember now, but it seems it's possible to actually have ISA at the beginning and then Adamo, Lusinga, I. So okay, I can see Andrew is nodding, so I think it's possible then. So yeah, but let's make do with this for now, right? Okay. All right. So the summary basically of the whole data description so far is that we've seen that with WH questions in Gorwaa, pseudo-cleft is used. So something like the thing Adam ate is what? The person Adam saw, the person who ate beans is who, something like that. You have a pseudo-cleft. And for the answers, we've seen different varieties. So we've seen a case where you can have the canonical word order, like in situ focus answer. We've also seen cases where you can actually have pseudo-cleft answer. And we've also seen cases where you have what looks like a specificational copular clause, which I'm going to show now in the analysis. So very interesting data, I would say. So this is what I just said now. So we've seen Gorwaa uses both pseudo-cleft and inverse specificational copular, right, in both constructions. And I want to point out here, because in the literature, there is a lot of controversy and debate on the different types of pseudo-cleft, right? And what I believe we are seeing here is that of specificational pseudo-cleft. So there's also the predicational pseudo-cleft, but it seems, I mean, as far as I know, I mean, there could be more, but with the little data we have, it seems that we have a specificational pseudo-cleft in Gorwaa, and I'm going to show you why I believe so. So then Deakin actually gave these conditions, or let's say properties of a specificational pseudo-cleft as a 9. So the first property of a specificational pseudo-cleft is that there is a constituent that contains a variable that is also called, an anchor or identified, right? So you have like, basically, what this means is there's like a relative clause, basically. So there's like first a relative clause, that's the variable where you have the variable, so the thing Adam ate. So the thing here is like a variable kind of, and in 9b, another property is that there's also a constituent that is exhaustive, or that constituent is specifying the value of that variable, and that constituent can be a focus. And this is what we have in our case, right? So you have the thing Adam ate is beans or is wool, right? So, and thirdly, there has to be a coupler or a linker that links these two major constituents. And if you look at the structure now in 10, that is similar to what we find in Gorwaa. So where we have the first property, the variable or a free relative, and then you have the coupler, and then you have the focus, or it can also be WH. So the thing Adam bought is what? Or the thing Adam bought is beans, right? So now, so that is it for the pseudo-cleft. I'm still going to give you an example in Gorwaa with what I believe is like the basic structure. Now, if you look at this, of course, I said not just pseudo-cleft, but we also have like an inverse specificational coupler. And how does that look? This is what you find in 11. So in 11, ISC, which is like the inverse of specificational coupler, is where you have something like who is the person who ate rice, if it's a WH question, or if it's a focus answer, it's going to be Adam is the person where it rise. And that's what we also saw, right? We saw that even though what we see in Gorwaa seems to be that the copula has been fronted, so the copula comes first, right? But the basic structure looks like 11 or even let's say 12. So 12 is like what you have like the syntax, right? So you have a CP, but then you have a WH or a focus in the specifier, and then this copula can be in the head of the C, and then you have a relative clause. This is a very simple, like a simplified structure. Of course, it can be more complex than this, but I mean, for our purposes, this is okay for us, really, right? So if you compare 10 and 12, what you will see is just like an inversion, kind of, right? So in 12, the specificational copula, I mean, both are specificational, but one is pseudo cleft, the other is just it looks like a normal specificational copula construction. And difference is that you see that in pseudo cleft, the focus or the WH is clause final at the end, preceded by the copula and the relative clause. While in the inverse specificational structure, what you find is the WH phrase and then the copula and then the relative clause, right? So something like, inversion, right? So bringing this idea to Gorwaa, all right. So in 13, this is a subject focus construction. So the focus, I believe, I assume it's base generated actually in this position. And then what you have is this first CP is the relative clause followed by the copula, and then you have the focus, and then everything is a CP, right? And for the inverse specificational copula, so Gorwaa appears uh, to have an inversion. Okay, there's a typo here, but it appears to have an inversion between the subject and the copula, right? So unlike what we saw in English, we see that so 14 now is like the specificational copula construction. So Adam is the person eating beans, right? And the structure will look like this in 15. So where what you have is Adam, copula, relative clause, but then there is a kind of head movement going on so that we can have the copula preceding Adam, right? So there are many ways we can assume this. It can be that this copula is in a pred P somewhere here, and then it moves to the C head, or like, but basically what we have is just the way the linearization will look like, right? Okay. So to conclude, what we've seen so far for Gorwaa is that it syntactically marks WH questions and foci. And what I mean by this is that we find, if you compare, we know that, again, Gorwaa is SOV, that's the canonical word order. But when it comes to WH question as well as foci, we see the use of pseudo-cleft, specificational copula, and that shows that there is kind of a syntactic marking of focus or even WH question in Gorwaa. I mean, compared to, again, many of the West African languages that I have worked on, where you have just this morphology. I mean, you have both syntax or morphosyntax going on in Yoruba, for example, that I showed earlier. So you have fronting and then this morpheme that is like the focus marker, but that is not really the case in Gorwaa. What you find in Gorwaa is more like a purely syntactic. There's no focus morphology as far as we've seen or we know, but you have like, this kind of pseudo-cleft, relative clause kind of construction, which is very interesting because, again, it also, I think another question with respect to that is, you see this kind of biclausality, because usually when you have cleft, it's a biclausal or pseudo-cleft biclausal, but, you have in a particular language is a monoclausal structure, in another language is, biclausal, and the question would always be why, right? I mean, I don't have an answer for that now, but it's interesting to have this in mind. I mean, why would languages do this, right? And importantly, we've also seen that apart from, this syntactic marking or focus or pseudo-cleft specification, we also see the non-cleft or canonical structures are also employed, especially with focus marking. As far as I know, with WH question, I do not see any, not like a canonical marking of WH, because usually they use pseudo-cleft. But for the focus answer, and I mean, that is not unexpected. Yeah, that is not unexpected because in a way, WH questions would have to be realized somehow. But focus answer, we can always know, if we have the canonical structure, we can always know what is in focus by looking at the question, right? So as an outlook, the question is, are there specific context where either the specificational copula or the pseudo-cleft is used, right? Because it seems that they use it, you know, both, they can use both to answer the question. It's the same question, right? So the question is, are there, if you come from a pragmatic point of view, are there like interpretation differences? And this has been shown a lot in many African languages where you have, when you have in situ, it's more like a new information. And when you have like ex situ or even pseudo cleft or even cleft, right? You have a kind of contrastive, exhaustive, just like in English. So it was John who bought a car. That's more like exhaustive. So it will be interesting to extend this to Gorwaa to see these pragmatic distinctions as well with respect to this different use of syntactic strategies. And also, we also saw that there are different movements going on, and this also needs to be accounted for, right? Because the structure I gave is a very simple or simplistic structure, right? So things are going on with the relatives. We also saw a case of even topic of topicalization of the subject in WH question that is already pseudo-clef. So a lot of interaction going on, and that leads to the last outlook where, to see, apart from focus or WH questions, looking at topic construction as well. So what are the interactions with topic constructions in this language? All right, so that is all from my end. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Um, Tell me what jumped out as you as maybe the most surprising thing when as you were working on this. What sort of hit you the hardest in terms of the structures and the constructions that you were getting and seeing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, so maybe because of where I'm coming from, right? So there's always been a lot of morphology, I mean, syntax movements as well. But I mean, I'm also familiar with the fact that languages use clef, pseudo-clef, but in Gorwaa, it's interesting because you find that, I mean, especially with WH question, for example, where you have this pseudo-clef kind of construction, and usually, I mean, I don't really know about the psycholinguistic studies, but I want to believe that even with psycholinguistics, cleft will probably be learnt early, or let's say easier for children than pseudo-cleft, right? And you can think of it in different ways because you probably want to go for the simple way, right? So the simple way could be maybe in English, you just front the WH, or you have the WH in in situ or the focus in situ, whatever. But the fact that in Gorua, the only way, at least that we know now, is this use of pseudo-clef or WH, and then you have the same pseudo-clef or even specification for answers. It really asks the question like it I mean there are many questions that this can raise, especially with respect to the simplicity of constructions as we know it, right? So based on Occam's razor, for example, you go for the simplest thing that you have that is possible, right? But of course that can also be, it varies. Maybe I'm speaking because the language I speak doesn't have this, right? But maybe for a Gorua speaker, it's not a problem because that's the only way they do, right? So I think it's relational kind of, but it's really fascinating the fact that the languages use, this complex, in quotes, kind of construction for this kind of transformations that could, basically, yeah.
So when we go to do our Gorwaa child language acquisition project, one of these years in the future, one of the things that we need to target is the questions.
Yeah.
Because of course you would think that this is one of the things that kids do, right? Ask questions, and if it's kind of complex, from a comparative perspective to acquire, what are the kids doing? How are they getting their
Yeah.
minds around this? Very cool.
It's a really ignorant question, but are pseudoclefs sometimes used for loan verbs? So might that be a way that makes them seem simpler? I
For
think.
loan verbs, what do you mean by loan verbs?
Loan, but you're borrowing a verb from
Oh,
another
borrowing.
language.
Okay.
And so instead of using all the morphology, you can say, well, you know, well, I mean, light verb constructions are more often used that way, but I'm wondering if.
Yeah.
I would think more commonly in Gorwaa when you borrow a verb, often what you'll do is Stephanie was talking about this, the S, the us marker at the end, you often get this stuck to the end of a verb that's borrowed, and then that turns it into a verb. Though I need to go back and read a little bit more closely. Stephen, you've unmuted yourself.
I was just gonna say, yeah, we did see that with soma in one of the examples that Stefani showed.
Yeah. So you get, so in Swahili to read is kusoma, but then
Mm.
if you want to borrow it into Gorwaa, for example, you would do something like somus, which would then make it a verb. So you put the causative in a sense.
And
Yeah.
you can use that in pseudo cleft, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what I thought as well. I think potentially, right? I don't think there should be a restriction with respect to the lexical, whether it's borrowed or not. But of course, if we find languages where when you borrow a verb, maybe you cannot do certain things, of course, we know we have such languages. So, but potentially for pseudo-clef, generally, it doesn't matter whether you borrow a verb or not, in as much as the verb is um, is used in the language and the language has pseudo cleft, then you can, basically construct a pseudo cleft or yeah. So I think it's about whether there is pseudo cleft or not in the language.
You mentioned, Daniel, that one of the next sort of steps in the outlook is like figuring out pragmatic distinctions. Do you have any thoughts on what like could be done immediately? Like if somebody or if you sort of took this on and had another semester or whatever, what might you do to test this in an experimental or like an elicitation sort of environment?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a very interesting question because um, so usually for new information, people have used WH answer congruence to test new information, but again and again, there is a lot of literature out there who have shown that it's not entirely adequate. As much as it gives us like new information, but we can also have context where even answers to WH questions, just like we find in Gorwaa already, where you find pseudo cleft to answers to WH questions. So if you tie answers to WH question to be equal to new information, then Gorwaa will say no, because we have answers to WH question that is pseudo cleft, right? But another way to look at it is you see that in Gorwaa, the WH question already is a pseudo cleft. And if you have like a question answer congruence, then you have answer pseudoclef, right? So that's one issue. So if I want to test new information in this language, I would not likely, I might not, I'm not sure I would use the WH question for this because it already gives like an exhaustive, the question already gives like an exhaustive pseudoclef. One,
Okay.
one, yeah. So one way to do that is you can have like more like an open discussion with someone and you record it, or maybe storytelling even, like just to have like a large context, like instead of question answer congruence, it will be easier to, to if you want to really find new information, is to like have like it could also be storytelling where someone is speaking, you're answering, but it's not really like the person is asking you the question, right? So it's more like it's not really an ordered conversation, basically. So it's maybe in the marketplace, you put a recorder, people are just speaking, and then you find, certain constructions where something is new about like the context where that speech is being given, right? That's one way. Another way that I found out recently is, I think by Silvio Crucina. So he had this paper in 2022, I guess, or thereabout, where they actually have what they called it delayed answer technique something. So even though you ask something in WH question, but then after asking the question, maybe something happened in between.
Okay.
And then maybe after like, for example, I asked a question, where did you get this pause from? Maybe I saw a pause on your cushion and I ask you, oh, this is nice. Where did you get it from? Right? And immediately what happened is maybe we had a sound outside, people are fighting, and we all went to look what is going on. And then we came back and said, okay, I'm answering your question. And so there's like a delayed response because there is actually a break in between. It's not immediately. And with that, people people like Christian have said you might find a new information in that context, right? But I think the gist of it in Gorwaa is that using WH question to elicit new information might not really give you what you want because WH question is already pseudo cleft, right? Yeah.
That's actually quite useful because I think a lot of sort of the information structure, sort of pragmatic stuff, it all really starts with questions. So the idea that okay, well,
Yeah.
that might not be the most effective initial tool given the way that this particular language works, I think that's quite useful. Also, I mean, in my sort of imaginative brain, I love the idea of like sitting down with somebody and setting up a semi-naturalistic experiment and then hiring actors to start a fight outside every time I ask a question. I think that would be great. And so with that, I think that we should probably clue things up. So